And today's broadcast is brought to you by Eclectic Horseman Magazine. Stay tuned for Eclectic Conversations hosted by Emily Gitchy.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us today. I'm here to visit with Kathleen Beckham about her book, Discovering the Work. It's a super great book. I hope you all get a chance to read it. So thanks for joining us. And Kathleen, what a, like, I want to say fun, but it wasn't really fun. It was really, it was really like an emotional roller coaster reading your book. So tell me a little bit about what inspired you to share your stories with everyone.
Well, really, as I've aged, um, I think that one of the things, especially women who are in horses, kind of run into is that you maybe don't see a lot of people who look like you. And I know that lots of women feel like their teachers, they could never achieve their teacher's level because their teacher is on such of this kind of rarefied level. And I feel like everybody has challenges, and as we age, we get less physically fit. We collect injuries, or we don't have time, because even people, once their kids are out of the house, women especially tend to replace the time that they spent taking care of the kids and organizing the household and everything with other things. And so they maybe their handicap is that they don't have a lot of time, to work with their horse and do the things they really enjoy. And so I feel like it's a really valuable message to say, there are a lot of people who look like you and have their own challenges, and it's not easy for people who we think are really good at this. It's not as easy for them as we probably think it is, because everybody has really put in the work, to be able to have horses and do horses and learn about horses. And everybody has challenges, and everybody's kind of it's a level playing field. So I just really wanted to encourage people to not be handicapped by their challenges and not be intimidated by their challenges, and just know that there's more people out there that look like you than you think there are. um I just think that's an important message.
For sure, for sure. And as I approach middle age with my daughter heading out the door, I have to say that definitely resonates with me. So you start off the book sharing your experience with having a stroke at a very young age. So for folks who haven't picked up the book or heard about it, can you just give us a little bit of tell us a little bit about that, so that sort of frames the entire collection of, it's really a collection of essays on different topics. Can you give us a little bit more information about that?
Well, everybody in kind of what horsemanship kind of has an origin story. Mm-hmm. A lot of people got a horse that they couldn't get to do anything, or they got hurt, or everybody kind of has an origin story. And that those stories are super interesting to me, because everybody kind of gets where they're going kind of a different way. And so for me, the stroke, having a stroke at age 28 as a perfectly healthy person with no family history or anything like that, was the catalyst for me being forced to find a different way of working with horses. So, I was a completely healthy person at the time. I didn't eat red meat. I was very busy. I was going to school full time and working a part-time job, and then riding kind of professionally a little bit still on the side. And I went for a hike with my then boyfriend and felt dizzy and sat down and never got up again. It was just very strange. And I remember thinking, oh, this must be what it feels like when an old person has a stroke, because you don't think at age 28, as a fit, athletic, healthy person, that you could possibly have a stroke. And then you do, and they figure out that is actually what is going on with you. And you find that you're kind of a member of a pretty small club, So with women, the most common cause of strokes in young women is them taking the pill. So if you read the fine print on the pill, it's actually got a substantial stroke risk. And I have in my life so far, I've met 2 or 3 women who had strokes, young strokes, because they were on the pill. And then the other cause is cocaine, I guess. So when I went to the emergency room, they kept asking me what kind of drugs I was doing. And I was like,
Oh my God.
drugs? I don't even eat red meat right now. I
Wow.
didn't take any drugs. Are you kidding me? So it took them a while to figure out that I had just spontaneously had a stroke, that I hadn't done this to myself somehow. So I, of course, had to kind of switch gears. I dropped out of college because I couldn't go, and moved out to Colorado because I had family in Colorado, kind of moved in with them, and they lived in Aspen. And so Aspen has a great public transportation system because it's a ski town. And there was a bus that went to the hospital, where the PT was at the time. So I could go outside of my uncle and aunt's condo in Aspen and jump on the bus and go to PT. And then I got a regular job in town that I could walk to, which was great PT, and started looking for a horse right away, of course. So I thought I would get, having just had a stroke and left side hemiparesis and barely being able to walk on my own, I figured I would get a 5-year-old thoroughbred that was basically untrained. I grew up with thoroughbreds. That's what we rode. I rode hunter jumpers in the early 80s. And so a thoroughbred was just like a horse to me. And the fact that it had never been on the track, which actually I would have been better off with a horse from the track, because they do have a certain amount of experience with, being handled and their feet picked up, and they, a lot of times they tie okay, and you can ride them, and they may not have all the bells and whistles that a more riding horse has, but this horse had basically nothing. Is a guy had kind of gotten on him, jumped on him, and run him up and down the mountains a few times, and had him for sale in the newspaper. So I bought him, and fairly quickly, figured out I was in over my head, because I didn't know how to teach a horse to do something. I only knew how to ride a horse that already knew how to do something. Mm-hmm. So I was a pilot. I wasn't a trainer, really, even though my job description before my stroke was trainer. People considered a show horse trainer, not a trainer. Mm-hmm. So anyway, so I got in a bunch of trouble with him, and luckily didn't get hurt or anything, but the horsemanship culture in Colorado is so strong. And so there's a lot of density of horsemanship, practitioners, students, and everything, that pretty quickly the right people found me and kind of took me under their wing and said, we've got some things that you can do to help this situation. And, because I had very quickly learned that the tactics that I had kind of grown up with, which were based on me being really athletic and strong, and kind of waiting a horse out, or having a knockdown drag out and winning the fight, I just couldn't do it anymore. And then I was like, well, if I can't do the things I know how to do, I have nothing. I have nothing. He was bad for the farrier. He was bad to catch. Well, you can understand why. He didn't like anything that was going on. He's like, this is such a cluster. I don't want anything to do with this. And he was stuck with me. So we, some people took me under their wing, and I was able to start kind of heading a better direction with him. And being in Colorado at that time, in the what that would have been the early 90s, it was a great time to just soak up everybody who came through town, and we went on road trips, and you just signed up for every clinic. It was that cliche that was going on at the time with the email horsemanship groups that we had at that time, of the horses, like, okay, what clinic did you go to this weekend? And one day you show up with a flag, and the next weekend you show up with a stick, and the next weekend you show up with a magic halter. And I mean, and we just got exposed to everything. And I had nice supportive people who were doing that and were willing to drag me along, and it was great. It was great. But it wasn't I didn't have an epiphany one day or something. It wasn't that I made a better ethical or moral choice in what I did with my horse, like a lot of people do today, is they kind of say, well, I want to have a more ethical relationship with my horse. It wasn't that at all. I had to figure out something I could physically do. So it couldn't be based on force or strength, So it was a very practical consideration on my part. And then as I learned more and, got around more people, I just fell in love with it.
So you said it wasn't, it was sort of a matter of practicality, but there still was a recognition of you, like that this approach was different enough. Like, so it might not have been an epiphany, but there still was recognition there where was it like, thank goodness I found this so that I can keep doing the thing that I love? Or can tell me a little bit more about that. Was it just that people found you and said, this lady needs some help and we're going to get her some help?
Yeah, I mean, it was all of those things. And like, I remember one of the first people I worked with is a guy named David Carswell, and he's from the Hawaiian island of Kauai. And he had worked a bunch directly with Pat Pirelli and Brian Newbert. He would go over to Brian Newbert's every year and start some colts with him and stuff. And they ran a dude string on Kauai, and they were friends with the woman, Holly McLean, who is still up in the Aspen area. I boarded at her place. And so she said, well, David is coming and he's going to be doing lessons and stuff like that, and you should do it. And so I said, okay, and I remember David taking us into the round pen on our feet and saying, okay, what to you constitutes a good leader? What do you look for in a good leader? And he got us all talking about, I mean, because then you kind of go this religious political route, because those are the kind of the leaders, or employment, who was a good boss you had, and all this stuff. And so he just started this roundtable discussion with us. It was like, don't even bring your horses yet. We have some things to talk about first. And I needed to be talked to on that level of, I was like, well, I never thought of like being a leader for my horse. He's just supposed to do what I ask him to do, isn't he? I mean, like, what is this thing? And so he was really the first one to introduce those really, really elemental, simple concepts of, what is leadership? Like, why is your horse supposed to feel safe with you? And I was like, he's not in danger. And then they're like, well, he's a prey animal, right? And I'm like, really? I mean, because the horses were, show horses especially, they're just kind of objects, and as much as we loved horses, and like I had my senior picture taken with my horse and everything, it's a different way. I mean, our horses didn't get turned out. We knew nothing about the 3Fs, forage, freedom, and friends. I mean, and we all had thoroughbreds, and they would go to shows and they would lose 100 pounds. And we know now they got all ulcery, and everything. And we didn't know anything about all that stuff. They were just supposed to go to a show and jump the jumps and win us ribbons. And then we'd come home and brag about our ribbons, So it was a completely different way of looking at horses for me. And then being surrounded by people where that's what they were doing, you always want to fit in. And so it was that thing where kind of choose who you're trying to fit in with. And so my desire to fit in with those people, I started reading, whatever they gave me, I read it. I subscribed to the Trail Less Traveled, that magazine in the very beginning. I had tons and tons of those, and I just kind of soaked up anything I could, but I, I had to start at that super, super simple level, and then David is just so sweet and unassuming, and he's got very little ego in how he presents, what he's presenting, that I felt safe kind of saying to him one day. I said, I've always bridled a horse off of a step stool if I have to. That's what the step stool in the aisleway is for, because in the cross ties, they can still get their heads up, so the horse would be in the cross ties and you'd be on the step stool trying to mash a bridle onto his head, and then you just get a bigger step stool when they put their heads up higher. And I said, could you show me how you guys would bridle a horse? And he was like, sure, yeah, I'd love to, but there's a point at which at that point in my life, I was so humbled because I still wasn't walking very well. I still had very little coordination in my left hand, say, and things like that, that I was like, well, I'm, I have nothing to prove here.
Yeah.
So I'm so broken down and so humbled, in life in general at this point, that I don't care if I'm asking this guy, like, how would you bridle a horse? Show me how you would do it, and that was a complete revolution, because he's like, yeah, if the horse is doing this while you bridle him, you kind of starting with a bad feeling between the two of you. And I was like, really? It's normal, So like for him to say, the horse is feeling bad about that. And I was like, wow, so am I living in a place where it's normal for horses to feel bad about what we do with them? Yeah, actually, probably. I hadn't really ever thought about how does the horse feel about that? What did the horse think about that? If he could opt in or opt out, would he opt in or opt out? Well, the horse I had, he was opting out because he would see me coming and he'd just walk the other way. He was just very clearly saying, you know what, if it was all the same to you, I would just rather not do this stuff, and so that it was a lot of humble pie in the beginning there, but I didn't, I wasn't a professional at that point, and I was just an amateur with a day job, trying to learn all this stuff over again, and I got enough working that I started to pick up training jobs again at that point, and started working horses part-time again pretty soon, because I could ride a horse down the trail, and I didn't know a whole lot of groundwork yet or anything, but I was willing to put miles on a horse on the trail. So out in that kind of country, that's a pretty easy job to get, because you can't just go up a mountain once a week on a horse and expect him to stay sound and sane, so they have to go up the hill during the week too. So I picked up a bunch of that kind of work and was able to do that. And it wasn't so much training as it was really just exercising and fitting. But it gave me different horses to handle and try things on. And, I remember having a couple of horses and getting ready for a trailer loading session. So I had actually, and, it's funny when you're a horsemanship newbie, and you start to get these different ways of thinking about things, I was kind of in wonder of my own thought process, right? So like I packed a lunch literally and put it on the fender of the trailer with a Diet Coke, a cold Diet Coke. And I was like, I don't care how long this takes, because when this whole thing goes terrible and these horses refuse to get in this trailer, I have my lunch literally right here. And there is no reason for me to put them away before they get in the trailer. I can be here literally all day. I'm off on the side of the parking lot. I'm not in anybody's way, blah, blah, blah. Well, wouldn't you know it, they both just stepped right in the
You're like, the Diet Coke didn't even have a chance to warm up.
It didn't, So it was kind of a really wondrous process, I think, to be in the middle of just thinking completely differently about everything, and the idea that a training session wouldn't be like a finite 1 hour or something like that. You're like, well, however, I mean, that was probably the first time I had ever kind of said, however long this takes, I'm just it's not the time it takes that I'm tracking, it's that we get it done in a good fashion for the horse. That was, I was like, wow, that's really different than the old me. Just take a broom and hit him in the butt, say, get in the damn trailer. I mean, that's what I knew how to do. I got my hand broken once doing that because he kicked the broom and the broom broke my hand.
Wow.
So, yeah, well, it's what you see your teachers do, and then you do it.
Yeah.
Whether it works or not, because you don't know you don't have anything else. You got no other tool in your toolbox, So we had a lunge line to winch them through, put it out the front of the trailer and then pull on it from the back to try to winch him in. I mean, how ridiculous is that? And we had hitting him in the butt with a broom. That's what we had.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you talk a lot in the first part of the book, especially about the physical challenges that you had about, getting the use of your left side back. And I'm trying to think of how to ask this question, but how did you, like, I was trying to feel like, what would that feel like if that was me? Like, how would I ever trust my body again to not just completely betray me in that way? Like, can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, because that's totally ongoing in that. So if a horse, say, ducks his shoulders to the right and I have to push down on my left stirrup, it ain't going to happen. It's not going to happen, because one of the things I did right after the stroke, and what they teach you in physical therapy is very important, which is you step up or down off, say, curbs, or you start to go upstairs or whatever with your good leg. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I stepped off a curb with my left foot. And when I did that, my ankle turned, of course, and I just blew the ankle apart. So it was a really bad sprain. I didn't break it. I probably would have been better off if I had broken it. But I basically just tore every ligament apart in my ankle and just blew it apart. So I ended up doing that 2 more times, and then I had the ankle reconstructed because I was in Aspen. There's all these great ortho guys there, and I had it rebuilt actually a couple of times, and they had to borrow ligaments out of my lower leg to put in there because there was just nothing left. And anyway, but anybody who's really badly sprained a joint like your ankle, which really there's so much of your stability comes from your ankle, your knee, and your hip, right? So my hip and my knee can't do anything if the ankle's unstable already, right? They can't make up for that. And so my left ankle is unstable to this day. It wants to roll to the outside constantly. So, just walking, I have to think about it, and this is what kind of like normal people, walking is an involuntary thing we do it without thought, right? At this point in our lives, is you can walk through sand, you can walk on harder surfaces, you can walk on gravel. Well, I'm really, really aware of the surface I'm walking on, because if the surface is unstable, then my ankle is even more unstable. like the arenas in England that are rolled, they're like waxed sand and like felt, pieces of felt and rubber. They're dressage type surfaces. And they, instead of fluffing them like a surface we do for Western riding, they roll them. And so it's like we're walking on carpet padding. And it's so stable for my ankle. I would notice how much energy I would have at the end of the day after walking around on that stuff all day. I'd have a lot of energy left over, because just walking on an unstable surface is very tiring for me, even today. So, so I'm very aware of, the fact that there are parts of my body that I still can't trust today, and may never, because trusting them may actually be kind of a bad idea, that, I mean, there's just being honest about it, it may not be a good idea for me to ever trust that left ankle to hold up if I have to step my full weight onto it in the stirrup, which is an unstable surface. The stirrup is an unstable surface. It's moving.
Yeah.
So, so there are certain horses that are easier for me to ride because of their movement. And there are certain horses that are more difficult for me to ride. And that's just the way it is. It kind of took me about probably 15 years to kind of figure that out, because I had to ride enough different horses to kind of say, wow, that one's really, really hard for me to ride. And it wasn't anything I was doing wrong. It was just the way that horse's movement kind of meshes with my neurology. It just makes me less stable in the saddle. So it makes it uncomfortable and kind of risky feeling, so.
So do you think, like hearing you talk about that, the stability, like, do you think that gives you, like, for horses, losing their footing is death, like it's the worst thing. Like, do you feel like that gives you some insight into how they feel, like when they feel unstable in their feet?
Yes. And I also think that one of the things it also does is because the closer you get to the center, right, the less challenges I have. The more you get out into my extremities, the more challenges I have. So a horse is really the same way, because if you're working with him kind of to his center line, instead of thinking exclusively about the extremities, then he can put his feet where he needs to be stable, right? And he needs to be able to make those decisions, and those need to be his decisions. So I think I've studied a lot and thought a lot about where are my horse's feet in relationship to his bulk, right? Because if I can't get my left leg under my bulk, and my bulk is, say, because this happens fairly often, say I'm going across a pasture here in Georgia, and if the grass is tall enough, what you can't see are big fire ant hills, just mounds, ant mounds, that they might be 18 inches high. And in grass, you're not going to see them. So if a fire ant hill stops my left foot and my upper body keeps going, I fall. Right. So I'll fall forward. Right. So it's the same thing with a horse, is where do his feet need to be to support his bulk? So I can't put his bulk somewhere where it's not supported by the four corners, and maybe he can get away with supporting it with 2 or with 3, but you can't put the bulk with no feet underneath it, because I experienced that and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I also think that it's really given me a appreciation for horses filling in, because I'm never going to ride a horse really symmetrically, because neurologically, I'm just not getting accurate messages back of where my body is in space anyway. And so each horse has to kind of figure me out and be willing to fill in. And, like the cues I give with my left leg are basically pretty different than the cues I give with my right leg, and same with left hand and right hand. But a horse can learn anything, right? A horse can learn anything. So I think over time, I've become more honest with myself about what I have to do to get things more even for the horse, as in, can he do his shoulder in on the left and the right? Will it look the same to the observer? And will he use himself equally nicely on both sides, even though the way I ask for that with my left hand and my left leg are different than the way I ask for it with my right hand and right leg? So with my left leg, I teach different responses than I do with my right leg, because the idea of Kathleen becoming a symmetrical rider, which is what most people are trying to do when they go to the gym or they take up jogging or whatever they do to try to be able to use their left leg just like their right leg and use their left hand just like their right hand. I just have to forget all that. There is no way. There is no way. And it's completely possible. It's completely doable, because a horse doesn't know any different. And especially these horses that we've started ourselves, if I ride them fairly early on, which I try to do, I try to ride them as early as is safe for me to ride them. And so they learn me, and they don't know any different. It's just like getting your rope down on first ride colt. Like, he doesn't know that you didn't come with that standard from the factory. They don't know. So they don't know that a rider is, somebody has said at one time that a rider is supposed to be, totally ambidextrous and symmetrical. And I'm not gonna be, so my time is better spent figuring out how to be effective than figuring out how to be symmetrical, if that makes sense.
It does. And so then that makes me curious, like if there's a horse that you've started and they've learned to sort of to fill in and to sort of read between the lines about what it, then when they move on to another, do you think that that helps the horse to be more thoughtful as far as figuring out what it is that you're trying to communicate? Like it's not something I've thought about before in that way, but when the horse goes to somebody else, like what's been that transition like? What's that transition like?
As I've seen it, is they pretty well, because in the Ray Hunt tradition, really what you're teaching a horse to do is try, and you're kind of telling him there's a preferred answer, but it's almost like there's not a wrong answer, because there's a preferred answer. And so what they learn to do is cycle through their options until they get relief, whatever you want to call it. And so they tend to have a lot of try. And so when somebody different rides them, they can ask questions like, is this what you mean? And the horse, I have seen them adjust pretty well, because my husband is completely able-bodied and he can ride all my horses pretty seamlessly, and he's actually left-handed. So his left leg and left hand are very dexterous compared to mine, because that's my weak side. And I have never seen them be alarmed or confused about that. Like, what's all that going on the left side over there that's all kind of accurate and stuff,
Yeah.
I just haven't seen it. They have become pretty flexible. And I think a key to that has been this idea of, think. Just, you want the horse to think, because any horse I ride, he's got to be able to think his way through what's going on in my body, and be willing to read the human on kind of an intentional level, because sometimes that's going to be more clear than my body's going to be, so yeah, I've seen them adjust pretty well, actually.
Yeah. It's cool to think. I mean, it's cool to think about it. I've thought about filling in, but I haven't thought about it in that specific balanced way. Like that's really interesting to think about. Let's see. So like I started off by saying that the book, like you bring up so many challenging topics, like every piece you just go, oh my gosh, I can't believe she's going to talk about this. Like the chapter about when taking on the rescue horses, and then the quitting chapter. Like, I mean, you talk about some really, really challenging ideas in this book, and you just must have really felt called to share. I mean, you're so honest and so like, I don't really have the right words to say, but except for that, I appreciated the it wasn't just all the primrose path of sunshine and happiness, but you really tackle some challenging topics. And what's been the response from other folks about the topics that you've shared?
Well, I mean, again, I think it's just about being real, because only seeing the positive in everything is not really real. We know that human beings are born with a negative bias. Our brain is programmed for a negative bias. And I just get curious about what that's about, and being, a lot of these in this particular book, it's a compilation of basically newsletters that I wrote in the early 2000s up to about 2000. Well, the quitting chapter at the end would have come out, basically that was like 2013. Okay, so the next book will pick up in 2013 and be a compilation of all the stuff I've written since 2013. So it'll be bigger, it'll be more sophisticated, because it's going to reflect my journey, continuing journey. But I think especially for women, it's pretty gritty out there. It just really is. And I really wholeheartedly believe that everything we've done and everything that happens to us is an ingredient that goes into our horsemanship. And so that's why you will never have somebody else's feel. So it doesn't matter how long you study with them or how intensely you study with them, or whether it's one-on-one or group or all these variables, you will never have their feel, because you will never have all those life experiences that have created their feel, right? Now that's liberating to me. That's not discouraging to me. That's liberating to me. So one of the things I used to do when I was on the road is I used to always ask every student, and including like if they were retired, I would ask, what did you used to do? What was your job? What is your job? What do you do? Right? Because we can look at somebody with a horse and they look really incompetent. They look physically disorganized. They look confused. Maybe they've been taking a little bit from here and a little bit from here. And then the peanut gallery at the barn gives them this little bit, and they're trying to mash these incoherent parts together. And the horse is like, what is this? And so I would always ask, what do you or have you done for a living? And so what I'm asking is, where do you have an expert skill set? And they would be struggling with just holding the lead rope in their hands, right? And you're like, who can't hold a lead rope, right? Well, but they've only been doing it for a year or 6
Mhm.
months or
Mhm.
however long, right? And a lot of that time, they're not thinking about the lead rope. They're thinking about their physical safety. So that, this is not a thought. It's more in, oh my God, how do I be around this horse and not get trampled and thrown off and, all the bad things that you hear happen to people around horses. And that's in our releases all the time. And it was interesting because people would say like, well, I'm an attorney, I'm a family law attorney. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm an ER nurse. And I'm like, wow, okay, like competency up the yin yang, right? So I wanted to remind myself that, like, Kathleen, this is like you going to her job, going to the ER, and her saying, well, Kathleen, just hold this thing this way. And me going, I don't even know what this is. What do you mean hold it this way? You know, and that was really important to remind myself that everybody has a competency, right? And my area of competency to me is like their area of competency to them. So it's like they're at my job now, and I'm trying to show them how I do my job. But I've been practicing my job 8 hours a day since I was 18, right? And I practiced it as many hours of the day before that as I could, but I had this thing called school that kind of got in the way. So, but the negative part of that, like the quitting chapter, and there's actually 2 chapters in there on quitting. There's the other chapter about Bob Duncan, the starting gate guy
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
Saratoga, where I think the chapter is called "If You Quit, You Can't Help," because I couldn't believe that people weren't more interested in what he was doing, because I would go watch those guys work and I'm like, this is revolutionary. I mean, this is like a revolution in handling horses at the freaking starting gate. I have never seen anything like this. And that he produces people who are trying to work with these horses at the starting gate with feel, and it was flabbergasting. And I'm thinking, this is going to catch on like wildfire, right? And pretty soon all these tracks are going to want him to come and talk to them about train their people and, everything. And totally deaf ears. Nobody cared, So if there was a certain horse in the Derby that needed him, they would fly him in. But it's not like they would fly him in to train all the starters at the Derby. They would fly him in and he would load that one horse. And I'm like, wow. So that tells you a lot, doesn't it? That
Yeah.
tells you a lot. But I think, I think that the topic of quitting is kind of one of the things the horsemanship culture kind of struggles with, because for a long time, in say the 90s, quitting on a horse was like a cardinal sin. I mean, you didn't do it. It meant you were a loser, that you had failed, and you kind of didn't do it. So we saw a lot of people with inappropriate horses because we kind of hadn't gotten to a place as a culture where we could deal with quitting. And maybe the maybe quitting isn't so much about you as it is about the situation in general that maybe you don't have that much control over, So, for me, it was a crossroads where I had to, yet again, I mean, so after the stroke, I was like, okay, carry on or quit. And then once I started riding again, I had instructors who basically couldn't bear to watch me ride. And they would say, oh, let's get you off your horse and let's do exercises on the ground. And I'm like, this is because this irritates the snot out of you, doesn't it? You can't watch me ride, you know? And then I had to decide again, okay, so here's another fork in the road. Like, am I like being mean to these horses by trying to ride them like this? Or so do I quit? Do I keep riding? So then I chose again, well, I'm going to keep riding. I'll find a more supportive environment to do that in, who actually wants to see me succeed and see me get better. And then one, the thing with that horse Memphis, it was just very, very devastating, and you just have to decide, if this is how it's going to go sometimes, because it will, because it ain't fair, is our, do you want to keep going, or do you just say, yeah, I'll just, stay insulated from all that and not have to deal with it. So, so every time there's been a crossroads and I could have quit, I haven't, but, I would, I believe wholeheartedly that I was born a farmer, really. Because whenever I'm in a more sophisticated environment or around what I call city people, more urban people who aren't grounded in the earth and their involvement with, the rhythms and the rules of more environmental things, I feel very out of place. I feel very just really out of place, like a foreigner, but when I'm around anybody who does things with, animals and the ground and plants and stuff like that, we have something to talk about.
Yeah. It's like chore people, not chore people. It's like if you don't have chores, then yeah, it's a whole different existence.
I don't know. What do you people talk about?
No, you don't have to go feed something or fill up a tank or scoop some poop. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Well,
So,
I'm excited to hear that you're working on another book, because I mean I really, really enjoyed this one, and so that's exciting to hear that there's another one coming.
Yeah, it was funny because during the pandemic, one of the things that came out of the pandemic for me was that because I wasn't doing any in-person work during the pandemic, and I wasn't going to the usual clinics and stuff that I go to where I get to kind of be around other people like me and stuff. And I figured out during the pandemic, I was like, you know what? The thing that I have done in my life so far that has probably made the most difference for the most people and their horses, been the most helpful, okay, is writing. Because as long as I have a forum to write on, so back in the way old days when the horsemanship discussion lists were these clunky email feeds, and I think there was one that a guy named Rick Roll ran. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah.
So I was a lurker on all of those, and I read everything, because one of the things that you do when you're first learning about something is you have to learn the vocabulary and all that stuff. So I lurked on those things, and I was working in a day job where we had a computer at the work, and that was all new. Like the internet was brand new and everything, and you could go to this thing called Google and you could type something in and stuff would come up, and I go, oh my God, look, there's 24,000 results on this thing. And so way back then, I used to even go on like the Chronicle of the Horse. They had discussion groups that are web-based. They're on their website. And I remember one time doing this big long post, just like talking about a horse giving to the pressure of the bit, because they were talking about that their trainer was basically switching bits out on the horse, because this is a hunter jumper discussion group. And so they're switching bits out on the horse like every day, and the horse is running off, and it's pushing harder and harder on the bit. And so the trainer is getting these increasingly kind of medieval looking things to put on its face and everything. And I remember writing this big long post about, well, there's this thing called giving to pressure. And, like John Lyons was the first one I had read talking about giving to pressure. And I remember the first day I took my dressage whip out and I put my horse at the back of the trailer and I tapped him on the butt until he leaned forward and I stopped. And then I did it again and he put his foot up on the trailer and I went, well, this is like magic, like I'd never done that before. You just hit him until he got in. and for it to be like that precise, and then I'd reach up and he would start to lean forward. And I was like, holy crap, what is going on here? It was like magic. And so I was telling these people on this Chronicle of the Horse discussion group about giving to pressure and how if a horse is pushing harder and harder on the bit, it's because he's getting a release for pushing on the bit. And I remember that person writing back and saying, nobody has ever explained that to me. That is unbelievable. That I have never heard that before in my life, but it totally makes sense, and I remember going, I think I just helped somebody, kind of. Because now they're going to go to their trainer and they're going to say, well, this horse is getting a release for pushing on the bit, and the trainer's going to go, shut up and pay my money, But what it did was it taught me that you can get people to think about things through writing stuff. And I did that for free for a really, really long time. And then the pandemic came along and I kind of went, I should maybe think about figuring out some ways to get paid for doing the thing that I do that helps people the most, instead of just giving it away for free like I have for 30 years, right? In various online forums and all kinds of things, and then like the things in the current book are newsletters that used to go out via email. And it was funny because when I got the idea to put those together into the book, I didn't have them anymore. I didn't have them. I mean, we're like 5 computers down the road and they had gotten lost, and they weren't archived anywhere online either because they had been sent out via Constant Contact or MailChimp or something like that. And they don't archive that stuff forever for you. So I put a call out on Facebook and I said, hey, does anybody happen to have those old newsletters that I used to send out in the early 2000s? And all these people were like, oh my gosh, I've got them all, Kathleen. They're all in a folder in my email box.
Oh, that's
It's
awesome.
like, really? You've saved those? But I got every single one of them from several different sources. And I had several different people send me their whole folder so I could make sure I had all of them. And there were people that all had complete sets. It was amazing. But it was a demonstration of, that people saved those, they valued them, they were helpful, they could refer back to them. And I thought, well, that's the perfect thing to make into a book then, because then they don't have to keep it in their email inbox or in a folder in their email forever and ever. Amen. It'll be in the book and they can just keep the book.
Yeah.
So the power of the writing part of it, I think it was during the pandemic that I really got to thinking about that, that it doesn't matter where I live, I can write, because we're down in the far bottom right-hand corner of the country, and we're on the wrong side of the Mississippi for this kind of work and everything. So we're never going to be a big hub where lots of people come through here because we're just too out of the way in the grand scheme of things. And so doing the writing part of it, I feel like is my calling of the thing I can do to contribute to the culture and to, doing good, hopefully, for people or horses and their people, really is what it is. So, but the pandemic was kind of key in that, during the pandemic or right after the pandemic, I started my membership group, which is where I do most of my writing. So like, those are the people who want to be on the front side of, and it's a safer environment. So I post things on there that I would never post on regular Facebook because I just don't want to, put a target on my back any more often than I have to. So it's not always a really safe place to express your most precious ideas and thoughts, unfortunately. And I don't have a super thick skin. So it can be a tough environment. But my membership group, kind of came out of that idea of, well, what if I just saved my best stuff for them and made a membership out of it so that they're contributing to me having the time to do that, which is only fair. So that's worked out really well,
Cool.
but I feel like, that's my thing that I can contribute the most. I don't want to travel anymore. We've got 100 cows and a bunch of horses and cats and dogs. And, if I want to study the process of bringing a horse along, if I'm gone all the time, I'm not doing that,
Yeah.
So I don't really have the desire to travel much anymore. What I've done the last couple of years is I'll take a few clinics in the summer months because it's so bad down here in
Yeah.
the
You're like,
summer.
no, it's fine. I'll
Yeah,
go.
I'll go anywhere in the summer, and it's not always better, but at least, I mean, usually you don't have the intense humidity that we get down here because it's just, I mean, we're subtropical and it is very, very hot. And you can just about cut the air with a knife, you're basically breathing water vapor,
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah. Well, in Colorado, I'm in Colorado. So yeah, I have no idea what the humidity, what's that?
Yeah. So we used to say you can fill up your boots with your sweat,
Yeah.
and like the idea of just being sweaty all the time and your clothes being wet all the time. Like if you don't dry your jeans before you put them in the laundry, they mildew by the time you wash them.
Wow.
So you have to take your jeans, which usually the top of the back of the waistband is soaked at the end of the day. You have to take your jeans and hang them up so that they can dry so that you can put them in the hamper. It's
Okay.
different.
Yeah,
It's
that
pretty
is
different.
different. Yeah.
It's pretty
Yeah.
different. Yeah, it's different. So it's special.
Yeah. I'd want to go north in the summertime too. So I'm trying to think of how to ask this question. At the very beginning, when you were talking about bridling the horse in the cross ties, you were talking about that you just didn't have an idea that there was any other, that was just normal. And now we have so many resources. And so it's that idea of people don't do things that are wrong to be wrong. They get to see something that's different. And now, I mean, with everything, with all the resources that are available, it's harder. Being ignorant is you're exposed to so many different better ways of being. Do you think that the students that you have are more aware? Can you see a difference in the prevalence of information? It's harder to be in an isolated bubble because it's harder to stay in a bubble now.
Well, and I think there are certain places where people actually choose ignorance. I mean, take the AQHA and all the genetic diseases in the quarter horses. You can still register a horse that has one positive HYPP. He can't be positive, but he can be positive, and they'll still register him. I mean, we know better than that. We know better than that. So we're choosing ignorance. We choose ignorance when we do that. So, I think there are some places where, people are just insulated enough that even if they see something different, it doesn't apply to them. Because I can use the show culture that I came out of is if you're winning ribbons, then obviously there's nothing wrong with your training program. It doesn't matter what anybody says. It doesn't matter what anybody thinks. If you're winning ribbons, there is nothing wrong with your training program. Now, are we starting to expose the fact that that's not necessarily true? Well, sure, because we're seeing it with the stuff that's going on with dressage, competitive dressage and everything. And I think that, we're going to see more and more of that kind of ignorance being outed, because at that point, when you see those videos, you have to say that's not ignorance, that's malice, right? That because, one of the guys I worked for was Mark Rashid, and he was a horse abuse investigator up there where he comes from. And he said that 9 times out of 10 or more, maybe 99 times out of 100, the cases he went to, the people were just ignorant. They didn't mean to hurt the horse or underfeed the horse or not get proper foot care or whatever. They just didn't know. You don't have to take a test and prove that you know anything about horses to buy one. And my husband, case in point, he bought 3 or 4 horses when he was 50 some odd years old. He didn't know that they needed their feet done. So the local people here were like, hey, Glenn, you need to have the shoes need to be replaced. And he was like, what are you talking about? He just didn't know.
Yeah, just didn't know.
He was not mean, he didn't do it on purpose. So I think there's, yes, the information is out there. Like I said, I wrote a couple of posts about trailer loading on Facebook, like put all my best stuff in a free post about trailer loading because I feel so strongly that 1, it's not rocket science. And 2, if the information were out there, it would just improve the thing for the horses, right? Well, the thing that I said in that was that basically we've been loading horses and trailers for almost 100 years. So go to any public horse event at the end of the day when everybody's loading up to go home, and you're going to wander around and go, after 100 years, why aren't we better at this? My God. And there's information,
Yeah.
And a lot of it is free. So what's that disinterest? I don't know. Legacy of Legends years ago, you and I talked about this is, one of the rules of marketing is that you cannot sell something to someone that solves a problem that they don't know they have.
Yeah.
They are problem unaware, right? You cannot sell them the solution to that problem that they have, even though they have a branch sticking out of their head and you have a solution for that. You cannot sell them that solution or even offer them that solution in any way, even for free, if they don't think they have that problem. So I think that there's a lot of that today. And, people used to ask me all the time, well, oh my God, how do you deal with what goes on in the horse world? And I'm like, you can't reach the problem unaware. Marketers have been trying to figure this out for a long time, and they still have not figured out how to market to the problem unaware. So, you have to be aware of the problem first, which is then we're going back to everybody's got an origin story.
Yeah.
So you got to be ready to be part of the origin story when that happens, right? So somebody has that accident that makes the fork in the road, or they buy that horse who's just not going to put up with this stuff any longer. And then you need to make sure that you're there for them to choose to help them in case you can help them, which is what I tell all the women in my world, which is, you should be sitting in a seat at the table, at the boardroom. If there's an empty chair, there's no reason you shouldn't sit in it, right? And be a choice because, well, I don't want people to think that I'm a big deal. I don't want people to think I have a big ego, blah, blah, all this stuff, that women say. Well, you could help a lot of people if you were a viable choice. Just be a viable choice. You don't have to say you're the best at this ever. You don't have to say that you invented a new wheel. You don't, you can just say, hey, if you think I can help you, I would be happy to. I'm here. This is where I am. Boom. And your people will find you.
Yeah.
Ooh,
that was good. I have a feeling that you and I could visit all day.
Probably.
Once we get on a roll, it's like, but is there any question that I didn't ask you about the book that I should have asked you about the book?
Well, the thing I will mention about the book is it's only $5. Okay. And I did that. I had people writing to me, and especially women, writing to me and saying, oh, Kathleen, you have made a huge mistake in the pricing of your book. It's worth so much more than that. It should be $14.99 or whatever they thought it should be, And I said, no, whoa, before you throw me under the bus. Okay, let me explain. The thinking there was just, I remember being on the road with Mark Rashid, and one of the things I did for him was that I sold his books at lunchtime. Okay. And I don't know how many people came up, and I'll never forget. And it happened at every single clinic. So I got it all the time, and it made a huge impression on me because of the repetition. Is they said, well, I lent my copy to somebody and they never gave it back. And so I've got to buy another one. And they were kind of a little bit offended and a little bit grumpy about now they got it. And at that time, I think his were like in the $18 region, you know, because it was whatever was the cover price is what we were selling them for. And so I was like, dang, you know, but they were great books, you know, like you shouldn't be resentful that somebody kept it because maybe they gave it to somebody else who might give it to somebody else. And maybe somewhere there's a horse who's living a little better life because of it, right? So I just remember that. So I thought like for $5, it doesn't give me much profit, but for $5, people are going to be willing to lend it, to give it, to leave it in the tack room for others to pick up. And then, because I have ladies who do this, and then when it disappears, they put another one down. And when it disappears, they put another one down, right? Excellent. That was the point. That's not because that's all I thought it was worth. I wasn't suffering from like huge imposter syndrome or something. Oh my gosh, I don't want to charge more than $5 for my book because it's, you know, my thoughts aren't worth that. That wasn't what it was at all. It was sprinkled that fairy dust everywhere in just the chance that a horse might have a little better deal because of it. And I go back to, you know, my main goal in all of this is simply to try to empower or facilitate people maybe thinking differently about things in a way that then the horse's lot is improved somehow. So even if all they got out of my book was that there's another way to halter a horse than just cramming their nose up in the nose of the halter and then flipping that crown piece over to hit yourself in the head with it, you know, because you do those with a double diamond halter with that metal tip on the end, it gets old pretty quick. So, you know, I mean, but that's the way we were taught to put on a halter. You cram their nose into it. And then what happens is everything we do with them is put your head up, put your head up, put your head up. And now I can't bridle it. Well, now we know why, right?
Yeah.
It's because everything we did, we were teaching that horse to lift his head up. So anyway, so it's just priced the way it is because I wanted to make it easy for people to share. And I didn't want people to feel resentful if they lent it and somebody kept it because it was just $5, just buy another one, you know? So that was really the thinking there. And there's another example of how, you know, everything that's ever happened to us in our life goes into our horsemanship, right? Well, everything that's ever happened to me in my life goes into me deciding how to price this book, you know, because if I hadn't had those experiences with those people of, you know, griping about somebody keeping their copy of the book, you know, I would have been thinking, well, okay, how much money can I make off this? You know, I got horses to feed, I got shoes to put on them and stuff, you know, I mean, I got stuff I want to do, could do with the money. But I think it's, I'd rather have more quantity be out there if there's a chance it could help a horse somewhere have a little better deal. Yeah. So that's the only other thing I want to mention is it's pretty cheap. So go get a bunch of them.
Yeah. Well, it's a fantastic book and I super enjoyed it. And I really appreciate you taking the time to visit about it. And I will do this again when the new book comes out.
All right.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Kathleen. We'll talk soon.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.